Right, in this webcast we're going to look at the distribution tool, just a quick look at it, and the word I've chosen to look at is one related to the one in the unit. So instead of awfully, which you're probably bored of by now, I'm going to look at terribly, wondering whether it behaves in a similar way to awfully. So if I do a quick query for that, we'll find it occurs rather more frequently than awfully. In fact, over 1,100 hits in the BNC. So that gives us a bit more to work with, perhaps, and might make some of the results more reliable. Let's have a look at the distribution. There's distribution, click below. Now, like awfully, terribly is quite a lot more frequent if you look at the per million words, the normalised frequencies, in spoken than in written text. But again, we have got quite a large number of hits in written text, which need to be accounted for. Okay, let's look at the different kind of text types. So at the top of the frequency list we've got other spoken material. Now other spoken material refers to this context governed area, so meetings, tutorials, any kind of more formal interaction. So it seems that terribly is used more often in that kind of context than any others, but it's very close to fiction and verse, sorry, and spoken conversation seems to be a bit lower down. So obviously it's quite important in spoken interaction and in fiction and verse. And this is borne out if we look at just the written text. So it's not quite as high a proportion of the overall hits are due to imaginative prose as for awfully, but still we've got nearly half. And let's see, are they all in dialogues like awfully? It would seem to be the case that they are, yes. A lot of these are dialogues, although some of them are not. He was terribly disappointed, terribly embarrassed. Yeah, okay. So looking at some other things, we've got ages of author, sex of author. Women, we might find it interesting to know that female authors seem to use terribly twice as much as male. And age of audience, awfully, terribly is used more frequently in texts supposedly written for children, quite a lot then in those written for teenagers, and in turn texts written for adults use terribly less frequently again. Okay, well let's now have a look at some of the speaker variables. And we know it's used quite a lot in spoken texts. So what kind of speakers use it? Would we be right to think that maybe it's more used by older people? We would, in fact. So people who are over 60 are the most frequent users of terribly. There seems to be a reasonably clear pattern here with just these two categories, which are fairly close, being not in age order. So the very youngest speakers in fact don't use terribly at all. And that's quite interesting, and again very similar to awfully. How about in terms of sex? Sex of speaker. Right, this is interesting. So they're very, very similar. Men and women seem to use terribly quite equally. Finally, let's look at social class. Perhaps we'd expect higher classes to use terribly more often, a bit like awfully. And again, this is borne out by the data. So the highest class, AB, as defined by occupation, these people are much more likely to use it. But as you'll see, by the time we get to class, this data is getting quite sparse, only 25 hits. It's really quite a rare word in terms of the class, the data we don't have a lot to work on. Right, I think that shows the main features of distribution. Of course, you could have a look at any number of different variables here, which all might provide interesting data.